new best friends. You're gonna find a book you'll love to pieces. The girl behind the counter recommends dollar books and shelves of graphic novels. Titles old and new, you'll find them all. With action figures, board games, toys, and models to add to your new Comic Wednesday haul. The comic book store, the comic book store. 'Cause that's where the books live, but it's also much more. It's the heart of the art form that we all adore. Your friendly neighborhood comic book store.
Good evening, everybody. This is your mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And this is Source Material Live. It's Jupiter's Legacy Week here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, so we are looking at the show, but first we're looking at the book. And the book...
Wait, Jupiter's Legacy?
Yes, sir.
I read Jupiter's Circle. Just kidding. No, I read the right book.
I was about to hit stop. And that guy fucking with me is... is your favorite co-host, Chris Sheehan. How do you do, sir?
What's happening? Not even the Arizona hay fever can keep me away from talking about this Mark Miller book here.
So tell me about Mark Miller. Is he on your shit list? Is he a guy you like? Are you kind of nonplussed by him? What's your deal?
Mark Miller is he's okay. He's okay. I don't have really strong feelings about him at least when he's not messing around in a shared universe. Mm-hmm. I feel like he has stories that he wants to tell, and if the characters that are afforded to him don't fit those tropes or those traits, he will make them do it, regardless of if it contradicts 3/4 of a century worth of storytelling.
Where show me where he touched you on the doll.
He touched me in Civil War #2. No, it's I feel like he on his own. I think he's a talented guy. One thing that I will always say about Miller, which is a negative, is that all of his stories feel like they were created in a boardroom. Like they look at what's hot. They look at like what's trending right now. It's like, okay, I'm going to write that story. It's like, do you have any passion behind that story? Well, no, but it's going to make a lot of money, so I'm going to do it. And God bless him for doing it, but it just feels like there is very little heart in a lot of his stories. And I feel like I feel dispassion, and I mean, this is probably just me projecting, but I just feel like he's got what he wants to do, and that's what it is that he's going to do.
As I was reading Jupiter's Legacy Volume 1, which is what we're talking about tonight, which took place between April 24th, 2013 and January 14th, 2015, with some big breaks in between.
Yeah.
One of the things
it's Frank Whiteley.
One of the things that becomes very obvious is this is yet another one of those where it's the comic book writer kind of theorizing, hypothesizing, philosophizing about, well, what if superheroes were real? What would that look like?
Yeah, we get those. We get those every now and again, don't we?
I was thinking about our conversation about The Boys from earlier this year. Mm-hmm. I had just read Invincible by I think it's Kurt Busiek. Like the same day that I read this, as a matter of fact. I read a whole bunch of stuff yesterday, and I was just thinking about that. Like there are definitely people who, comic books and superheroes especially fill in for modern, your modern mythology, your modern Greek and Roman
Robin
gods.
Hoods, yeah.
And there are just some writers that don't want to play in that universe. They don't want to play in myth making. They want to be like, well, what if Superman were real? How would he act? And I can appreciate that. We talked a little bit about that when we talked about Grounded. What does Superman do when confronted with the realities of real life? And I don't want to get into that whole conversation again, but that conversation extended itself to Man of Steel, the movie, and all kinds of different things.
Certainly.
And so when I read Jupiter's Legacy, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, there's definitely this element of let's not make this about myth making. Let's make this about real people and how would they act if they were in this situation with these powers. How do you feel about that? I mean, what's your preference? Do you like it when we're in the fantastical realm, or do you like it when we're in kind of the boys, Jupiter's Legacy kind of a thing?
I think there's room for both, for sure. My preference would be the fantastical. I feel like, it's that old analogy where it's like, if a little kid tells you a joke and you laugh at it, it's the stupidest thing you can ever do, because they'll just keep telling you the same joke over and over again, expecting the same laughter. We had Kurt Busiek do Marvels, which was like the man on the street look at the Marvel universe. And it was huge. And they won't stop. They just won't stop doing it. Now everything has to have this reality to it where, and I mean, not to go into our grounded conversation, but like, what does Superman do if he realizes he can't save everybody? Well, he hides under his bed. He has a nervous breakdown. He does not exist anymore as we know him because it's too much for anyone to bear. That's why we need the little separation there. We need some fantastical. We need to believe that Batman can jump off a building, throw a line and swing to another building. When it's like, there's no other building there. How did you do it? No, we don't need to know.
I mean, just from a cultural anthropological point of view, I think society needs its myths. I think society needs its fantastical and its myth making.
Absolutely, and I think we're so cynical now, where I think we think that we're too smart for it. We think that because a lot of us who grew up reading comics in the 90s, before it was cool too. Before it was a trend, before there was something called geek culture. Back then, there were just geeks, and nobody liked us, and we didn't like being it.
It is an interesting thing, right? Because, like, when you think about that, if you were cool, you played a sport. If you were cool, you built a car, and you
skateboarded.
raced. Yeah. People who were into, like, science fiction and computers and Dungeons and Dragons and myths and all of that stuff were not cool. They were kind of shut-ins.
We were outcasts.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the shit started making money is what happened.
No joke. But I think we've been like you would have been less embarrassed being seen coming out of like a peep show when you were in high school.
I wanted to cut you off and go porn theater.
There you go. Then coming out of a comic shop with the latest issue of Spawn back in 1993. You would have been less embarrassed to coming out of the peep show. But I think that's been drilled into this whole generation, because this generation of writers was that generation of us who were ostracized, and we were at home on the weekends. We were not. There was no culture around us. We were all part of the same fandoms, but back then we didn't feel the need to identify as anything. We were what we were, and that's all it needed to be. But so much of what's going on now is informed by the people who lived through that, and I think there is a maybe unconscious bias against the more quote-unquote childish aspects, the fantastical aspects of comic books, where it's like, no, this is mature. This is something that can be read and appreciated by learned people, not just people who want to escape reality for 15 minutes. And unfortunately, as happens in every form of entertainment, the pendulum swings from one side to the other, and it very seldom stops in the middle. It just goes all the way over. And I think that's kind of where we're at with comics, because even the fantastical comics now, like Grounded, are getting these bits and pieces of reality where you have to ask these more philosophical questions and these more ground level questions, and that I don't know if it does it the favor that I think the writers think it does.
It's funny you brought up Civil War before, and this will be the last point, and we'll actually get into the book. But you think about what Civil War was. It was, let's start asking questions of our characters about.
We hate the Patriot Act. Let's write about the Patriot Act.
Well, I was going to say, let's start moralizing and having ethical debates. I mean, I don't know if you saw the movie or whatever, but that's what that was too. the movie was, hey, the Avengers have done X, Y, Z, and some of it's been good, but a lot of it's ended in mutually assured destruction.
Certainly.
In collateral damage. And there's a line in it by General Ross, like, you have been allowed to exist without supervision, and that is just not something the world can tolerate anymore. And then you have, a very agonized and guilt-ridden Iron Man going, I believe in the need for supervision because I can't live with my own mistakes, like building a killbot. That caused an entire country to be destroyed. And then there's Steve Rogers, like, with this like inherent distrust of big organizations, especially since in his previous movie he had just taken down S.H.I.E.L.D. because it's been infiltrated with Hydra. Mm-hmm. So he's coming from this place of, hey, I don't want to be in a position where we're handcuffed by a nefarious,
red tape,
unseen, governmental entity that may or may not have our best interests at heart here, or
anybody's best interests at heart.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, he had, in Captain America's trilogy, there's his origin. Then he discovers that Hydra has taken over S.H.I.E.L.D., and then there's Civil War. And so he's coming from this place of, you know what? We're better off on our own. And yes, mistakes get made. People die in battle. That happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we're better off without the supervision, and therein lies the conflict. Mm-hmm. Which is great. And I think you can afford to do that sometimes. But when it becomes
that fundamentally changed the Marvel universe.
I was going to say, but when it becomes the base from which all your other comics will come out of. Like, I just finished reading House of M.
Okay.
And I liked House of M. I mean, it has its faults, and I don't want to go into a side review of House of M, but, my takeaway from this was, I understand the X-Men have always been somewhat of a political thing. They were a stand-in for homosexuality. I get that.
First it was the race, the black and white, and then gay. They've always been the marginalized group of the day. Yeah.
Could you try not being a mutant? It's a line.
It's just a phase.
It's a line from the second X-Men movie.
Oh, really?
Which is, that is literally what the mom says to Bobby, who is Iceman, and there's literally, Chris, a coming out scene.
Wow.
Yeah, in the movie, and so they think they've sent him to a private school, and they have, but it's the Xavier School for Gifted Students.
Youngsters.
Yeah, youngsters. And so he comes home, and he is like, Mom, Dad, I'm a mutant. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we still love you, but could you try not being a mutant? And they say this in front of Wolverine. It goes well, as you can imagine.
I would imagine, yes.
In any case, like, I'm not the guy that beats the drum that says, I don't, get your politics out of my comic. I understand there has always been some degree of politics and moralizing and philosophizing in comics. Mm-hmm. But I think, and just to kind of lead back to Jupiter's Legacy and to a greater extent, The Boys, I think that sometimes these authors get a little too caught up in their own agendas, and they forget that these are supposed to be for fun.
100%. 100%.
That's not to say that I hated Jupiter's Legacy. There's a lot to like about this, and we'll get into those.
No, there is a lot to like about it. Absolutely, it has some Millerish tropes to it, and we'll get to them as we go through it. I'll save it for when we get there. So we'll get into it without any.
I will say this: I liked it better than The Boys. The Boys is extremely cynical. This, at least, focused on a very personal story within sort of a greater theme or idea, as opposed to The Boys, which is like superheroes.
A kick in the dick.
Yeah, superheroes would be shitty in the real world. Let's see how shitty they would be. Here's Homelander forcing a girl to blow him.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is that I went into Jupiter's Legacy expecting to hate it, and I didn't. So that's good.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't hate it. That's important to me. All right, issue number 1 of this is a 5-issue limited series. Now, there are 4 volumes total. There are 2 for Jupiter's Legacy. and then there's a spin-off called Jupiter's Circle, and those are 2 volumes
And that's
as well.
that's the prequel. That's the stuff. Well, the parents are active, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we are dealing with Jupiter's Legacy, the very first thing from this particular IP, issue number 1, April 24th, 2013. Here we go. In 1932, Sheldon Sampson, a patriotic American who lost everything in the Wall Street crash of 1929, is driven to charter a boat to a mysterious island west of Cape Verde that appeared to him in a dream. Believing that the island holds gifts that will mean salvation for a country needing heroes, he journeys there with 5 other people, including his brother Walter, his fiancée Grace, and some old friends from college. What they find there turns them into the first 6 original superheroes and the originators of a dynasty of superheroes that tries to use their superhuman abilities to help others. Decades later, in 2013, conflict develops between Walter, who believes they should take a more direct approach to ending the Great Recession and tell President Barack Obama that he should be doing this in his second term, what he should be doing in his second term, and Sheldon, who is adamant that superheroes' moral responsibility is to obey the country's elected leaders. Sheldon and Grace, who are now married, are also troubled by their children Brandon and Chloe, who have inherited powers of their own, but instead of following in their parents' footsteps as heroes, lead lives of celebrity endorsement deals, superhero groupies, and drugs, which leads to an overdose on Chloe's part. All right, so what do you think of this first issue?
Thought it was good. Thought it was a good issue. When we went into it here, I was, you see the cover and it's got the kid. It's got a Brandon, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the opening, quarter of the issue is the folks, and I'm like, oh boy, this is gonna. I'm like, this is a period piece. This is gonna be in the 30s. I don't want to do this, but I was very, very pleased when we jumped into the then present of 2013. I was a little bit. It's the tropes. It's the tropes here. Anytime somebody wants to do their own superhero universe, it's like, well, here's the Superman, here's the Flash, here's the... It's like, can we not? Like, do we really need... It's every single time that somebody does their own... It's like...
There is a cottage industry of people who just want to take the piss out of Superman.
For sure. For sure. But it's like, if you're going to create characters here, how about they aren't Superman? I mean, there's got to be some powers that have not been thought up yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some personality types that have not been, given proper paginal real estate in comic books. But no, it's like, oh well, we need the strong woman, we need the fast guy, we need the magic guy, we need the really strong guy, and we need the smart guy. Every damn time. But I was happy that they were pushed into the background.
For my part, I was a little... I liked where it went, but where it starts kind of made me roll my eyes. And it wasn't the conflict between Walter and... who's this?
Sheldon?
Yeah, it wasn't the conflict between Walter and Sheldon. It was the ne'er-do-well, Kardashian-type celebrity kids. The
celebutantes, yeah.
Yeah. I understood the greater point of, I think it's Sheldon, who, who pushes his kids and holds them to an ideal, and them sort of suffering under the weight of expectation and becoming what they do. I understand the psychology of it. Certainly. I'm just kind of bored by it. Is nobody a good parent?
Yeah, I think this was done specifically to illustrate the ideological schism between Walter and Sheldon here, where Walter basically wants and will eventually get the police state, right? Mm-hmm. He wants Big Brother. He wants to have control over everything here, and seeing that Sheldon's children have run amok, basically, it shows that the difference between, and we also see Walter's son, who is much more regimented, right? Mm-hmm. So it shows the difference between that which kind of grows into their ideologies of how they should be, what role they should have on the planet and within government. Walter is big into control, and his kid is controlled. Sheldon's more loosey-goosey. It's like trust in the system. It's not perfect, but trust in it. And his kids are wild. So I think it's just an extension of their points of view.
Yeah, no, and I get that. And I think for Sheldon, it's also a matter of, I think inherently he knows power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so he doesn't want to become Superman in the injustice world.
Sure.
But I think he's one of these people who sort of inherently believes in the idealism of what they're doing and what they're supposed to be. And I understand that a lot of kids would have difficulties with that. A lot of kids would suffer under the weight of expectation. Like I said, it's not that it's not believable. It's just a little boring.
It's something that we see. I mean, a lot of people will compare Mark Miller to Grant Morrison. They did a lot of work together. Miller was something of a protege to Morrison back in the day. And this little run here is exactly what I would have seen Morrison do. Just have the celebutante, superpowered kids. It feels very, very much like it.
And so I was hooked. I wanted to see what would happen, but I was more into sort of the Shakespearean, Walter kind of manipulating Sheldon's son into wanting to take over things so that basically he can get his way. He's like, he knows he can't do it directly, but if he can get his son to betray his father, that opens the door for him to become king.
And it also shows that if he can get the kid to take down his dad, there isn't much that he can't get him to do.
Right. So I think of all the things that were interesting about, other than the obvious allusion to King Kong, them going to, the secret uncharted island.
Yes.
That was probably the most interesting thing here. Do you have anything else on issue 1? If not, we'll move on to issue 2.
We don't know what the island is at this point, right?
No, it was kind of
we get that a little bit later.
Yeah, they didn't know it was there or what it was, and they didn't show any detail of it until after the fact.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Issue number 2, June 26, 2013. After a botched attempt by a drunken Brandon to use his powers to help others nearly ends in catastrophe, Sheldon intervenes and excoriates his son for his irresponsibility. Dismissing the humiliated Brandon as a shallow celebrity, meanwhile, Chloe survives her overdose but learns that she is pregnant, like you do, and tells her drug trafficker boyfriend, Hutch, who is both the child's father and the son of the world's greatest supervillain, that she will move back into her parents' Encino, Los Angeles home for a few months on the advice of her addiction counselor. After Sheldon forbids Walter from presenting his economic ideas to the president's cabinet, Walter approaches Brandon and convinces him to help depose Sheldon as the leader of the superheroes. So we're starting to get somewhere here. You can start to see where the story is going. I'm glad Chloe's not a complete tart.
Yeah.
Because that would have been unbearable.
Could you imagine reading 5 issues of that?
Ugh,
yeah, no thank you.
Well, okay, so what if the Kardashians had superpowers? Write it. Give me 5 issues. No thanks.
No.
My only kind of criticism about issue number 2, they introduced the idea of Hutch being the son of the supervillain. And they never show you any battles with the not even in a brief flashback.
No.
It's just sort of said. And I would have liked to have seen some of that. I would have liked to have seen the animus relationship between the parents that results in the kids being what it is. I would have liked.
They want you to buy Jupiter's Circle.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that's as an aside. Back to House of M for a second.
Sure.
My big complaint with House of M was it moves a little too quickly, and you don't get enough time spent in the world. And when I read the synopsis, it made a little bit more sense to me. But when you're reading it on the page, Wanda's conversation with Doctor Strange goes from 0 to 60 in
no time.
In no time, and she's like, it goes from I just wanted to make people happy to fuck it, no more mutants.
Yep.
And I'm like, wait, what?
Where did that come from? Yeah.
Yeah. And I got yelled at by He Who Shall Remain Nameless because I was told by several people, well, if you want to spend more time in this world, you have to read these 800 other books. And I'm like, fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
A lot of tie-ins, yep.
Tell your story, tell your central story in your central book, and you fill in kind of ancillary backstory shit in these other books.
Yeah.
But your central story must remain strong. And that's
the Marvel method.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was told. It was like, you're sort of yelling at the comic book industry for doing what comic books do. And I'm like, no, bad writing is bad writing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incomplete. It's very, very incomplete. I mean, Civil War, had... I don't know if you can fill an omnibus with Civil War. I think you might need two, because there were just so many damn tie-ins. There were so many crossovers. Even today, where we just wrapped up King in Black, the Marvel story. So many one-shots, so many miniseries, so many tie-ins. It's ridiculous what they do.
The difference for me was I didn't feel like Civil War was missing giant bits of the central narrative.
You're right. That was all in the main miniseries for sure. Yeah.
Right. Whereas
that's something that people complained about. Having Spider-Man unmasked in a book that isn't Amazing Spider-Man, people got annoyed.
Oh, go fuck you. Fuck yourselves.
But it's nice that it's all there. If you buy the trade of Civil War, you get a story.
Right.
You actually get a whole story.
Right, and so, House of M is certainly not a bad idea, nor was it a bad story, but it's missing giant chunks of the narrative, and things are going at light speed, and you're like, wait, what? And the answer isn't, well, you need to read the tie-ins. No, write better stories.
Have you ever read Millennium from DC?
No.
Oh, Lord. Now, Millennium is like a 40-part story, and the Millennium miniseries is parts of that story. So, the entire Millennium, the middle portion of Millennium, it's an 8-issue thing. So, issues 2 through 7 is basically the hero standing around being like, hey, do you know what happened to the Suicide Squad? And it's like, go check out Suicide Squad. It's like, what? Hey, guys, did you hear what Batman did? Well, go check out Detective Comics. It's a disaster. It is the worst thing ever. You need to read all of it to get any of it.
When they did Death of the Family and Batman, now that was a true crossover. There was no central Death of the Family series.
Yeah. There were no one shots. It was just the ongoing books.
Right, and then and it was Part 2 continued in Detective Comics. Part 3 continued in Batwoman. Okay, fine. I'm more accepting of that because
Sure.
Again, when they compiled it all together and created the trade for Death of the Family, it was contains blah blah yakety schmackety,
and it's the whole story.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wish I know you jokingly said well, you got to read Jupiter's Circle, but that's my thing. You introduced this character, you introduced this relationship, you showed me none of it. You just said it existed.
That's another thing with contemporary comic writers. It's I think it's another part of the backlash from the way comics used to be made, where it used to be show don't tell, and now writers are like, wait, I can write better than an artist can draw, so I'm going to tell, not show. And it's like, no, that doesn't work. Yeah, this is the worst supervillain on the planet, and he used to be our friend, but we hate him now. And okay, you told us. I don't care yet.
Right.
We don't know if we should feel any sympathy for anybody. We don't know if we should feel any animus toward anybody. We don't know what. This could have been like he brought in sprinkled donuts instead of powdered ones, and he did it every week, and we hate him for it.
If this is supposed to be like a Capulets and a Montagues, you have to show me the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues. That makes the Romeo and Juliet story, kids. For the children listening, you have to then make
in the back.
If you don't show the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues, then the Romeo and Juliet story doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. They just seem like
Why are they They just seem like they're hiding from each other for no reason.
Yeah. And that Three's Company ending when one of them doesn't really kill themselves, but makes it look like they do, and come and knock on our door, take some poison for you. Anyway.
Blink, blink, blink.
Anything else about issue number 2?
Issue 2, I enjoyed Hutch's power, his non-power, right? Mm-hmm. His whole thing is that he doesn't have powers, so his father, the worst villain on the planet, created him this rod. And the rod, he uses the rod in very interesting ways. I really like the way that they did this here. These two heavies come into a bar and meet him, or a restaurant or something, a little dive bar, and they take his wand. And so this is a wand that can teleport things and teleport people. So he just says, shark-infested waters, and this dude winds up in the middle of shark-infested waters and he's eaten. And then Hutch just says, home, and bada bing. The little rod shows up next to him. I thought that was really cool because it's not something I would have thought of. And then the other heavy's like, yoink, I'm out. Never mind. I thought that was cool. The father Sheldon doesn't. I mean, the issues the story was so well paced where I don't remember which issues these things happened in. Does Sheldon know yet, or does that happen next?
I believe that happens next.
Okay. So yeah, I won't mention that then. But I liked the exhibition of Chloe's power in the hospital, where her cousin comes in with a teddy bear for her, and she's like, "Get out, get out!" And then she screams like, "Get out!" and it shatters windows, it cracks the walls. I thought that was really cool because I don't think we'd seen that I mean, we knew she was superpowered because the narration captions told us she had powers, but we never actually got to see them until right then. So. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of sets the scene for just how powerful this character is going to wind up being.
I like the cousin's reaction. Well, go fuck you then.
Yeah. Screw you. I'm out.
Yeah. Issue number 3, August 28th, 2013. Sheldon orders Hutch to stay away from Chloe. There you go.
There it is. Okay.
Informing him that he and Grace will not allow a drug trafficker to raise their grandchildren. And that's another thing. If he's a drug trafficker, can we see him traffic drugs?
He's a drug distributor, right?
I just, we're
just taking their word for it.
Yeah.
Tell, don't show.
In the movies, this would be known as like an exposition dump.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that people criticize about film is when you have just long scenes of characters explaining stuff.
Each other. Yeah.
Instead of doing the thing that they can clearly, instead of doing it, they're talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Film is a visual medium, and comic books are a visual medium. And so, certainly. Is there a reason why we couldn't see him distributing drugs?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a disconnect because it's like I could tell you the story of the worst day of my life, but you didn't live it with me, right? So it's like, oh, well, that sucks. And that's basically all I'd be able to get. Here there is this disconnect because it's like we know that his father's the worst villain on the planet. We know that he's a drug pusher. They're telling us this. Mm-hmm. That's it. We've got no skin in this game. We're just being told things that it's like this will be on the test. Remember it. Well, I'd remember it more if you showed it to me.
Yeah, the first issue really should have been they go to Skull Island or whatever it's called. I'm calling it Skull Island from now on.
Yes.
They go to Skull Island, and they touch the green kryptonite crystal, and they're instantly powered. And the next thing you see is them fighting, having like a last stand against their worst villain ever. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing should have been Hutch, like visiting his dad in the raft.
Sure.
And then show the kids, at a red carpet affair or at a club or something. Mm-hmm. Like the first issue should have been setting up all of this stuff that they're just kind of talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think, as we're going to find out in this issue, I think Mark Millar was very much concerned with the debate between Sheldon and Walter and everything, and the getting the kids to the mall thing was the takeover of Brandon and Walter and the exile and going into hiding of Hutch and Chloe. And it was like, I just want to get them there.
Basically, yeah.
But if you want to tell a good story, then you have to show all of these other things too. You can't, in this particular case, rushing to get to that point in a 5-issue story, you're leaving out good chunks of character and world building that I think are important.
100%.
Sheldon orders Hutch to stay away from Chloe, informing him that he and Grace will not allow a drug trafficker to raise their grandchild. When Hutch offers to end his criminal life and pursue a legitimate one, a skeptical Sheldon says he once made the mistake of trusting Hutch's father, which ended in disaster. Really? What disaster? Where? What happened?
Help us with this.
Walter and Brandon lead the other superheroes in an attack upon Sheldon and Grace, murdering him and prompting Chloe and Hutch to become fugitives. This is what I wanted to ask you about this. So this is where we have Brandon killing his father.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the boys again while I watched that scene. And I was thinking about you and that conversation that we had, and I was wondering how you felt about the violence of it all.
I thought in this scene it made sense. Because I think we need to... It's like we have... what's his face? Walter is like this, like Svengali. You know, and we know he has mental powers. Yes, and we
Rasputin-esque.
Yeah, and we know that he has mental powers here. So we don't know how much of this is actually being done of Brandon's own volition. I mean, the whole scene before this here, he has Chloe and Grace thinking that they're winning this battle. You know, but it's all in their head, and actually, in reality, Grace has been skewered. Like, absolutely just run through by every sharp object in a 5-mile radius, you know? And I think that was... Is it hyper-violent? Of course it is. It is. But, I mean, this is... You know, we talk about reality. This is what it would take if superheroes were fighting other superheroes. It wouldn't be Iron Man blasting at Captain America's shield. It would be brutality, because you have to raise the stakes. These are super powered people. This isn't going to be, you know, a pinch fight. This is going to be we need to wipe this person off the planet with no ifs, ands, or buts. I need to see bone. I need to see blood. And I mean, we know that what's his face here is going to rule with an iron fist. So what was that? Oh man, what was that? The Lubyanka. Is that was that the hotel, the building in Russia, where they would take all the insurgents and all the presumed traitors, and they would stand them up in a room with a drain in one end of it and blow their brains out, just to show that they could do it. I think that was the Lubyanka. This is what Walter's doing here. He's showing what he can do. Because this isn't just an act against Sheldon, no matter how it's being posed to be, right? He is actually putting everybody in line. You know, he's killing Sheldon, by proxy, of course. He's killing Grace by proxy. But all the people that are helping him know, like, oh shit, look what this guy can do. Look what these two can do. We better not, you know, rock the boat any. So it has to be hyperviolent to make that statement and actually get under the skin of these other superpowered characters who are on his side.
I'm in agreement with you. I thought, you know, if you're going to have a scene of Pat and matricide, it has to be big. It has to be dramatic.
Has to go for your throat. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there was a part of me that was wondering, is this going to be interpreted as sort of hyperviolence for hyperviolence sake? Like, well, you know...
It could be, but I don't think... Yeah.
It's an indie comic. and we're not confined by the Marvel and DC thing, so we can really mess somebody up in these comics and really give you that indie comic violence feel.
Sure. I could totally see an argument for that, but I think it worked in this scene for sure.
I agree with you. All right. Anything else about issue number 3?
What else happened in issue number 3 here? During the discussion with Hutch and Sheldon here, that's when Sheldon, he notices that something's happening here. This is what kicks off the entire. I mean, this thing is so well planned out. They have him go to fight a mile-wide asteroid that's coming toward the Earth. And so he does the Superman thing. He tries to stop an asteroid or a meteorite or whatever the hell we're calling it. And the whole thing is loaded with nukes. So this thing explodes, sends him back to Earth in a weakened state. All the people, all the supers who are on Brandon and Walter's side now start beating the ever-loving shit out of Sheldon. He is just getting beaten from pillar to post all across this planet. And then Brandon just puts his eyes out. And it was like, it shows what kind of a strategist that Walter is here. He's very regimented. He's very military-minded. He's very intelligent. He's leaving absolutely no room for error. And I really like that, because that's a villain you could be scared of. That's a threat. That's a guy you want to see get his comeuppance, because you don't know how it can happen. You're going to wonder, how can anybody beat this guy? He's 5 steps ahead of everybody. He had this thing planned out. He knew Sheldon was going to go fight the asteroid. He knew it was going to explode. He knew he had people in place to beat the shit out of him. And he knew that he got his own son to blow his head off. It's truly a masterclass in villainy. And I really liked it. And I really it was almost disappointing that Walter took a back seat towards the second half of this arc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk before Sheldon is murdered. Throughout the first 3 issues, they kind of go back and forth between the two of them over these 2 different sides of the Civil War, essentially.
Yeah, it's an ideological dispute, the Mark Miller special.
And I was curious to see what you thought of that, because, again, you have Walter, who's like, we're gifted with all of this intelligence. It's one of the aspects of Superman that's often, everyone focuses on his powers, but it's the rare comic that actually reminds you that he is gifted with superhuman intelligence.
Sure.
There are plenty of issues of Superman out there where he's, creating cures and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the Superman that I like, because the writers that kind of just see him as a tank,
sure,
punching things, I miss the point of Superman.
Yeah, it's a bonus to get every month. Yeah.
But you have Walter, who's like, we were given this power. You insisted we have this power back in 1929. And you're not letting us use it to our full potential. And then there's Sheldon, and I said that phrase before, power corrupts absolutely. Yeah, I think Sheldon is very much aware of the
slippery slope.
Yeah, if we do not serve humanity, we will rule humanity and become the thing that we have been fighting. And so he's very much wanting to put limitations on what it is that they do out of necessity. Yeah. And Walter, very much like a Lex Luthor kind of character. And I guess that, now that I say that out loud, it was probably done purposely that way. If one of them's Superman, you got to have a Lex Luthor.
Sure.
But isn't that kind of Lex Luthor? When Lex Luthor isn't deathly afraid of Superman and, insulted by the idea of this, superpowered being when he is, the smartest man on Earth, Lex Luthor is very much like, shouldn't the smartest amongst us rule?
Yeah.
That was a big part of Red Son.
Mm-hmm.
Was Lex Luthor, saying, I'm the smartest man on Earth. And that story actually, plays along with the idea of, well, what if we actually let Luthor just run shit?
Mm-hmm.
How would that play out? because Luthor is typically either thwarted by Superman or undone by his own machinations and his own hubris. But in Red Sun, it was like, nope, he had it right all along.
That's the best Luthor. I mean, there was a story in the 90s called Final Night, where the Sun Eater was going to eat the sun and leave Earth in just a forever winter until life perished. And to fight this thing, they got Brainiac 5 and Lex Luthor, the heroes, put them together and had them working on a way around this. And I remember one line that I loved quoting on the blog was Superman came over and he's like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. And Lex Luthor turns to Superman and goes, he's like, wait just a second there, Kimosabe. This is what we're going to do. And like Brainiac 5 sitting there is like, yeah, Luthor's right. And really, really good stuff. Of course, it didn't work, and it ended with Hal Jordan sacrificing himself to reignite the sun. But the lead up to it was really good, Luthor, and that was just a few years before he was elected to be president of the United States, which is a story that I absolutely loved. That I know a lot of people didn't, but I like the idea of having a fake president, and if you're going to include a president in your comics, make it someone you can actually screw with. Make it someone who can actually do things and not reflect on either party or either ideology. It's just Lex Luthor is the president of the United States. What do you do now? I like that kind of thing.
Yeah. This is going to sound like to people that I hated this book. I really didn't. It was an enjoyable read.
It was, yeah.
But I can't help but think it was incomplete. And, I'm always the first person to be like, wow, this was a 4-part story stretched into 8 issues.
Sure.
But this was a 10-part story that was cut short. And I don't mean like, well, there's the second volume, Radulich, don't you understand? Like, no. I mean...
there are swaths missing.
Yeah. Like, this first... Like, to get to the same exact place they got to at the very end of issue number 5, they really needed 5 more issues of this. Yeah. To really... Because I wanted more of Walter and Sheldon, too.
Of course, because the dispute we get between the two of them, it's funny because... in a way, it's like the anti-Civil War, because Civil War was written in a way where you could, I mean, the whole tagline of Civil War is whose side are you on? Mm-hmm. So there was merit to both sides, right? You could identify with Tony Stark. You weren't supposed to, but you could. I wanna
preface this by the whole premise to Civil War is we've allowed superheroes to evolve into a thing where some of them are not responsible and are doing stupid things that end in death.
Sure.
And this is why we all want them to unmask and be agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and not be vigilantes anymore, because this is what led to a town being blown up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like you could identify with Tony's side. You could, and you were supposed to, go with Captain America's side. Here, it's much more black and white. And I feel like that's one of the things that people complain about with Civil War. It's like, well, they're acting out of character, and who is right here? They both have things that they're saying that make sense here. The right thing is somewhere in the middle, but we're not allowed the middle. Here with Sheldon and Walter, it's like it's the people, trust the system, or we are the system.
Right.
There's no middle ground, no gray area here. And it's funny. It's like almost like a commentary on the comics industry in a way, where it's like when faced with the government, jumping in and taking over comics, the industry was like, no, we'll police ourselves, and they wind up doing it more severely than had the government done it, right? So you have Sheldon, who's like, we have to make sure we don't become what we've been fighting. Which can be looked at, if you're Walter, as holding themselves back, not meeting their potential, which is kind of his whole argument. It's like, we have the potential to do so much good, and we won't. And it's complicated, but it's also very simple. And I think we could have. I agree with you 100%. We should have seen a little bit more of this here. This shouldn't have been the inch deep, mile wide of the argument here, because we're not seeing them make any arguments except at the broadest strokes.
Right.
So there isn't any ambiguity. It's
Yeah.
just like, we want a rule? No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't.
I just feel like that, like there was this huge rush to get to Chloe and Hutch with their child in hiding, and it was like, do you have you front loaded this thing with so much stuff and then gave it no time?
Yeah.
Because you also needed more you get the one scene between Brandon and his father where, he has to bail him out of, drunken...
capsizing the boat or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, on the one hand, that's probably enough to establish the relationship between them two, but he's going to kill his father in another scene.
The next time we see them in the same room.
Yeah. Maybe a little more is needed here. It was funny, you were mentioning Civil War, and I remember one of my big complaints about that one was the exact opposite of House of M, which was we got to the Civil War a little too fast.
You're right. Yeah, we blew up the school in Connecticut, and then it's like, we're here.
Well, I wasn't even thinking that. It was more like, it's like page 1, whatever. Page 2, Steve Rogers is on the helicarrier. Maria Hill's like, get him, boys. Like, wait, he didn't do anything yet.
He's just there.
Yeah, he hadn't done anything yet. He hadn't objected to anything. They hadn't told him to unmask or anything. It was just like, shit's going down. We suspect you won't agree. Get him. Like, what?
Thought crimes.
Like, the middle of Civil War had a lot of meat to it, but, like, the beginning, it was, like, that was definitely a rush to the mall.
Mm-hmm.
Before we continue, let's go ahead and pay some bills here. I want to talk to you about Grammarly, and maybe Grammarly might have helped them pace this comic a little bit better. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork to download Grammarly for free. All right, issue number 4.
Well, one more thing here. I was thinking, as you were talking about Grammarly, not about grammar, unfortunately, but I was thinking, it was like a shower thought popped into my head here. I'm not sure we're reading a comic book.
Go on.
I think this was always a pitch for a goddamn TV show. How about that? So I think the pacing in as far as what we expect from a comic book is kind of out the window, because this is Miller putting all of his best stuff out there, not wasting the time of people who are going to make decisions about what's going to go on Hulu or Netflix with things like characterization and deep plot and intricate scenes of lore, and instead just the bombastic stuff, because that's what's going to sell on TV.
You should go on Comixology one day and click on the As Seen on TV section. And an hour later, when you're done seeing what has been adapted into a television show or a movie,
oh boy,
you may want to walk into the woods to live deliberately. I mean, when I tell you the amount of, just like, never mind like the Marvel and DC, which that's like low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
The amount of Dark Horse and Image and all these different like indie companies that have developed shows on the Sci-Fi Network, like, never mind Netflix and Hulu. The amount of shit that I've seen that was developed into shows on Sci-Fi could sink a battleship.
Oh boy. Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking now. It's like, I wonder if if this was just out there as the he could drop the graphic novel on a desk of an executive and be like, check this out. And that's all that was needed.
Well, I was going to say, it wasn't that the sort of reverse engineering that we talked about with Welcome to WrestleTopia?
Sure.
It was like they had a script idea, and they couldn't get it made, so they turned it into a comic book so that it could be turned back into a show or a movie.
That's right.
Welcome to comics in 2021.
Your stepping stool to anything else you might want.
These are bound storyboards.
We need Judd Hirsch to be sitting at a table being like, that guy's a movie writer. That guy's a playwright. That guy makes music videos. Me, I'm a comic book writer. I'm the only comic book writer in comics.
What's that from?
Taxi.
Really?
It's like he's a boxer. He's an actor. He runs a business. Me,
Oh,
I'm a
okay.
cab
I know
driver.
the line now. Okay.
I'm the only cab driver here.
Right. You know what? I actually do remember that line. But you switched it to comic book people. I'm like, damn it, you lost me. But you found me again in the
There
woods.
we go.
All right. Issue number 4. In a flashback. January 1st, 2014. In a flashback, Sheldon and his friends explore the island and encounter aliens who grant them superhuman abilities. So this is that issue you were talking about.
Assassin's Creed. You ever play Assassin's Creed?
I have not.
Okay, well, in Assassin's Creed, you'll be. The whole gimmick there is that you're in an animus here. You're in the present, but your mind is in the past. So you are an assassin in a specific era. It might be the Roman era, might be current one is the Viking, the Norse era, Egypt, ancient Egypt, stuff like that. But when you're playing and you're in these far-flung pasts, there are these little bits of modern sort of architecture that look a lot like Skull Island when it's defoliaged. It's very, very similar to it. And there's a lot of alien involvement in Assassin's Creed 2. So I don't know if there's any cross-pollination. I mean, it's a trope in and of itself. So I don't want to say it's a one-to-one, but seen it before, that's all.
The movie was terrible. That's all I can tell you.
I didn't even know there was a movie.
There was, and we reviewed it, and it was bad.
Which assassin was it? Was it Altair?
Oof.
Was it Ezio?
Michael Fassbender was in it.
I don't know who that is.
He's Magneto in the X-Men prequel trilogy.
I thought that was Sir Ian McClellan.
That's the X-Men proper trilogy.
Oh, okay.
It's fun when we talk movies, isn't it? All right. In the present, the story has jumped forward 9 years to show Chloe, Hutch, and their 8-year-old genius son, Jason, trying to live inconspicuous lives in Australia while hiding from Brandon, Walter, and other superheroes who have taken over the world and created a police state. Although Chloe and Hutch have raised Jason to fake mediocre performance in both academic and extracurricular activities, a la The Incredibles, in order to avoid detection, he secretly uses his superhuman abilities to engage in clandestine heroics. Meanwhile, Brandon is troubled by the street riots and food shortages that characterize the regime he and Walter have created, as well as their inability to find Chloe. Walter urges him not to lose faith in their work and also reveals that suspicious activity in Australia may lead to Chloe and that the professionals will look into this. Yeah, so I don't know if you ever saw The Incredibles, but I got a very Incredibles vibe from this, where it was like, you have to hide your powers, you can't use your powers, you can't excel at anything because it's not fair to everyone else around you, and so, the kids live very dissatisfied lives, and frankly, so do the parents who have given up being superheroes because they are only using a fraction of their potential and their abilities, and they're not happy, and the humdrum, mundane lives of white people in the suburbs, especially when you're superpowered, sucks.
Yeah, this is also John Byrne's Man of Steel, where Clark was told to tamp down, not be the all-star football player, and there's even a scene where Clark does perform this amazing play on the football field, and Pa takes him aside, and he's like, "You can't be doing that." He's like, you just can't, and it leads to the revelation that Clark was found in a birthing matrix in that story. But yeah, it's this is old hat for this kind of thing for sure.
It's interesting you say John Byrne's story, because in the Donner Superman, he's a towel boy for the football team, and he's keeping his
Byrne
powers.
was influenced by those movies a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in the Man of Steel, which everyone got upset by, you have Pa Kent, played by Kevin Costner, telling Superman, "Don't use your powers to save people. People are not going to accept you once they realize what you are, and they're just not ready for this sort of thing." I mean, granted, it's taken to an extreme where he's like, "Well, you should have let a bus full of kids die." Like you do.
What did Mark Waid think about that?
I just find it interesting that, because like I said, people got upset with Man of Steel. They don't even remember the Donner thing, but it's not like it came from whole cloth. This obviously has its origins in the comics.
Sure.
And as you said, it's a well-worn comic trope of
Absolutely.
Don't
Protecting the secret, yeah.
Right.
The super agile superhero acts like a klutz. It's Barry Allen is always late. It's kind of what they do.
It's I think I've heard it explained by some writers via their characters, like, creating an alter ego that's somewhat of a doofus is what helps you retain your humanity, which I think is an interesting idea.
I can see that as an argument for sure. Yeah.
But I can also see the side of it presented in this book where Chloe and Hutch, just out of anxiety, and just straight up fear of what will happen to them if they're found out. Oh, yeah. They're kind of Jews living in Nazi Germany at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, this isn't about protecting a particular secret identity. This is about protecting their son, their lives. This is about opening up, a huge, can of worms, right?
Yeah, they are the Jews living under the floorboards. Mm-hmm. Hoping the Nazis don't find them.
She's in the attic. Yeah. You ever hear that joke? Or that? I don't even know if it's a joke. I think it actually happened. There was a play of a presentation of the Diary of Anne Frank, which was so bad that when the Nazis came on the stage, people were yelling, "She's in the attic."
No, I was thinking of I think it's Inglourious Bastards, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Inglourious Bastards. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Nope.
The opening scene, Christoph Waltz, who is a Nazi, goes into a milk farmer's house, and they have a long, protracted conversation about milk. But Quentin Tarantino, being from the Alfred Hitchcock School of Film and Tension, therein, as Christoph Waltz is just sort of calmly talking about milk and how one gets milk from a cow and how great the milk is that he's drinking, pans down and you see a sweaty, frightened Jewish woman underneath the floorboards.
Ah.
And then they pan back up, and you suddenly realize what the tension of the scene is, and that is that this milk farmer is hiding these Jews, and he doesn't know if Christoph Waltz knows he's full of shit or not.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, come for the Jupiter's Leg of these conversations. Stay for the discussion on random films and comics.
There you go.
Anyway, so I get Chloe and Hutch, and I was with them, and I understood their reason for hey, be normal. We don't want to get found by the Nazis.
Yeah.
But their son Jason, was very much the kid from The Incredibles to me. Which, if you haven't seen it, like I said, very much he's the Flash analog in that movie.
Okay.
But he can't win races because that's unfair. Shit like that.
Sure.
So, and all he wants to do is run fast. He's an 8-year-old boy who's able to run at the speed of light. He wants to run fast.
Absolutely.
And so I really like the Jason character because here we have a kid who's I can't just, he's doing what his parents ask him, and he's not sullen, and he's not bratty about it, which is what I liked. I like the fact that, this one particular character, they left kind of innocent and not cynical. Not everyone and everything is just shitty and depressing. He's a genuinely decent kid trying to do what his parents and looking for approval. It's was I bad enough, Dad? Was I mediocre enough for you?
Did I suck enough?
Right. Let's go home and miss a baseball. That sort of thing. And I kind of like that. They get it. They understand the danger, and the kid's okay. But he's still a kid, and kids rebel, right? And he's I can't just not do anything when I know danger's afoot and I can do something about it. My guilt won't let me. And so he does, but of course in doing so, he attracts the attention of the wrong people, and therein lies the conflict.
Sure.
This is probably the first issue I don't have any complaints about.
Yeah, there was this was good bit of actual world building here, where it doesn't feel like we missed an issue. It feels like everything we needed to get was here.
Mm-hmm.
We see how things are going back at home. We see how the best laid plans of Big Brother are maybe not all they're cracked up to be. Is this where Brandon goes out and starts yelling at the rioters?
Yes.
And okay, so he runs out to yell at everybody and tell them to like piss off, and then all of a sudden they start applauding him. And he's like, and he actually had to turn to, I mean, this might just be a sign of how dumb Brandon is and how easily manipulated he is. He has to actually turn to his uncle and be like, "Are you doing that?" It's like, well, no shit. Of course they were just throwing tomatoes at you. Now they're clapping. Come on. But I like that because it's the uncle here, Walter. We can see how like almost detached he is from actual humanity. He doesn't know how to make people happy besides using his powers to do it.
I got to ask you here. Like, I know that we've talked in the past about liberal agendas in comic books and comic book writers. But
Sure.
this almost felt like an attack on liberalism. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And maybe when I explain it, you're like, oh, shit, hey, you're right. So when you think about conservatism in its most philosophical, most natural form, conservatism really is about the status quo.
Sure.
Let's gradual change, if change at all. Let's not make radical changes to things. Let's kind of keep things as they are and adjust as necessary, but nothing so over the top and earth-shattering that it changes our way of life. Ultimately, that's conservatism, and that is the draw for a lot of people, who benefit from the status quo.
Yep.
Liberalism is we're really smart, really intellectual people, and we have these really great ideas. And if only someone would let us be in charge and let us employ them, the world would be we'd be that much closer to Xanadu. We'd be that much closer to utopia. And I don't mean this to be like a political thing, and people would be like, "Oh shit, Mark's conservatism is coming out." No, but. There have been liberal ideas that have been tried. Many of them have failed. Now, we can get into the minutia of why that might have been, why these were imperfect situations, but the point being that very, very smart people, very, very smart people who mean well and really want to see an improvement in things, and are not looking to upend, the American way of life, or any way of life for that matter, do not have a nefarious, ulterior motive, are often given the opportunity to do so, and it doesn't always work out that well, and then they kind of fall back on excuses. Sure. And that's what I see from Walter here, because he's kind of drawn as a fascist, but he's a fascist with a liberal agenda in the sense of, I'm so smart, I have all these progressive ideas, if only someone would let me do them, and then he does, and it doesn't work out, and it's like, well, reasons. And I'm like,
there's actually a place where that actually happens quite often, and that's in the American education system, where the kids who grew up when we grew up had all these great ideas to change things, and so overnight things changed, and things are different now, and we're not worried about the basics that we learned. We may not be geniuses, but we can make it through life. We can tie our shoes, chew gum, and get to work, right? So I think we're doing okay. But
I know people who can't.
This is true. But there are the folks who have those ideas, and of course they mean well. Well. There might be a little bit of backlash about the way they were taught, but they mean well, and these changes come in, and when you change everything all at once. And because we got to imagine, taking it back to Jupiter's Legacy here, we don't know what the news cycles are like there. We don't know if Walter controls that. He might. But for argument's sake, let's say he doesn't. He would have to know that there's pushback, that this isn't working. When you actually have to serve whoever is going to aggregate your message, there needs to be results. And the only results we see from Walter right now are blimps watching people, right? And poverty and all, like really bad shit. that's the result. And kind of like, with the education system, it's lowered expectations and lowered grades. So there's your result. I think you're onto something there, because at the end of the day, Walter did not mean any harm here. At the outset, I don't think he meant to take over the world. I don't think that was ever his grand design. He was basically wanting just to make some changes here. And his changes, as a lot of ideas do, sounded really good when he was explaining them to Sheldon in I think, issue 2. He's like, check this out. In 4 years, there'll be zero unemployment. We will have no reliance on this. We'll have no reliance on that. There'll be no income tax with my plan. And of course, when you're talking about a country as diverse and as populated as America, as the United States, that's a tough thing to do, because there's a lot of, not everybody's going to fall in line. People. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, people talk a lot about the two-party system here, but there's a lot more than 2 points of view.
Sure.
To the American life here. And we are one of the few countries on this planet that accepts everybody. We don't get credit for it, but we do. And there are a lot of people with their own traditions and histories and just their own way of life. And we allow for everyone to explore their way of life and to celebrate it. And to have a one-size-fits-all plan like Walter has, just released on millions of people, it ain't gonna work, because everybody's coming from a different point of view and different way of life.
A genius level intellect combined with unrestrained hubris. This is the result.
Recipe for disaster. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I understand people's sort of reticence to collaborate. But it's collaboration, as we've learned from the George Lucas Star Wars movies. Collaboration is what creates really dynamic and wonderful ideas. Ideas in a vacuum, unquestioned, often result in disaster. And if anyone is kind of listening to this going, I don't like that I turned into this comic book podcast and this one fat ass started attacking liberalism. Let me cite 2 examples to back up my point. On this, I think it was like in the 60s and the 70s, the liberal science community assured us of 2 things. One, global freezing. That where we were going with pollution and where we were going with the environment was leading towards a global freeze. Like, we were headed towards another ice age.
Okay.
That didn't happen. But all the experts said it was going to happen. Okay? They also said there was going to be, with population... Now, the best liberal minds, best, most progressive, most educated, most scientific minds out there, with no political agenda giving them the benefit of the doubt, just looking at the data, saying... We've taken data, we've done studies, and we've extrapolated from this data that the world will become intensely cold and will not be able to support life in X years. There'll also be global famine. We will not be able to feed people because of population overgrowth in Y years. That did not happen. The second thing I would like to point to actually was captured in the book Freakonomics, and then was talked about on the conservative talk show, and what was written by liberal economists in the book Freakonomics was then attributed by the conservative talk show host and was blamed on him, because our stupid culture. Of course, I'm talking about Freakonomics, and I am talking about the Bill Bennett show. Which, whatever you want to say about Bill Bennett, he was fucking reading from the book and thought it was interesting. But what it says in Freakonomics is the most bestest, most smartest people at the time, in the 60s and 70s, thought that come the 80s, we will see the rise of the supercriminal. That even that during the malaise of the 70s and the rise in crime, we were going to see an exponential rise in death and robbery and burglary and all kinds of high crimes, violent crimes in our most dense cities as the 70s turned into the 80s. And statistically, according to the Freakonomics book, that did not happen. Mm-hmm. And the attribution was to the rise of abortions. They surmised, based on data, and this too is up for debate, but their summation, as written about in Freakonomics, based on the data that they found, was the reason why the rise of the supercriminal never happened was because the people who would have become the supercriminals in the 80s did not live.
Oh, boy.
My point is, rounding this back to Jupiter's Legacy and Walter, is that Walter, for me, whether Mark Millar meant this or not, is an analog for that kind of thinking. Whereas I have all the math, I have all the knowledge, and therefore I can extrapolate from this math and from these studies and from this knowledge that X, Y, Z will happen. And it doesn't. Shit happens you never even thought about. And just to make
Meltzer write Freakonomics?
Did Dave Meltzer write freaking... No. It's worth reading, by the way.
Plans changed.
Plans changed. Says 411 Mania.
Scoops.
So anyway, I just, for people who are like, why would you say such things? I mean, I just pointed to 3 examples of where this has happened. Now, certainly, smart people have made predictions that have come true, and I'm not saying they don't. But I do think Mark Millar sort of pointing at the idea of sometimes the brightest, most smartest amongst us with the best intentions don't get it right, even with all those smarts and intentions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that was kind of what Sheldon was trying to get him to understand. It was like, you fucking think you've got all the answers, but what if you don't? Exactly. What if there's a variable you hadn't counted on?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great movie about the launch into space called Hidden Figures, and it specifically deals with the black women who worked in the math department, the counting, that helped, that were essential in the space race. Mm-hmm. These were the unsung heroes of the space race because black women. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that becomes very apparent is you have all of these great minds and all of these mathematicians and all of these, science majors kind of gathered in a room talking about what you need to get this, to get this rocket off the Earth into the atmosphere and land it on the moon safely. And there are variables they hadn't even thought about, which is the point of bringing in the black math lady. Sure. Who's like, hey, have you thought about all of these other things? Mm-hmm. And then there's a racial component to it, and I don't need to get into any of that. But my point is, you and me can sit here with all of our knowledge and all of our math and all of our ability to extrapolate based on data and still not get it right. And that's Sheldon's thing is to Walter early on in the book. You don't have the right to upend the entire way the world community works just because you think you're the smartest stripper in the room.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And I wish there was more of it in the book. So,
for sure, absolutely.
All right, anything else about issue number 4?
Nope.
Issue number 5, January 14th, 2015, the final issue of this first volume. Jason's secret is deduced, because of course it is, by his schoolmates and his mother. And when he falls victim to a trap laid by the U.S. government's hunter of superhuman refugees, Barnabas Wolf.
Oh, God. He looks like a Barnabas.
I was going to say villainous bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Bad guy Mick tie lady to train track. Yeah.
Yes, Mustache McTwirly.
There he is.
His parents are brought out of hiding to rescue him, thus blowing the cover. Afterwards, the Hutchinses resolve to round up Hutch's criminal friends and mount a resistance against Walter and Brandon, knowing that the latter forces outnumber them 5-1. And now we get to the punchy parts.
Yes.
As we said in Doom Patrol. This was fine. I mean, yeah. I know for a lot of comic book readers that's what they want, and I've certainly now read enough comic books over the last few years doing this show, either as the host or not, that you cannot just have 5 issues of philosophical debate.
Yeah.
You have to have the punchy parts. And so the punchy parts were had, and you have the conflict between the Emperor's Hand and our rebels, and it ends the way that it does. And buy the next issue, buy the next volume,
whenever it comes out, if it comes out.
Yeah.
Is Frank Whiteley the artist on the follow up?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
At
okay.
least on the variant covers, as near as I can tell.
Okay.
Yep, issue number 1, volume 2 was released June 29th, 2016, so, a year and a half.
Year and a
later.
half. Oy. That's the lead-in time you need for Frank Whiteley, unfortunately.
These indie comics and their schedules. When's the next one coming out?
Anytime they make Frank Whiteley like a regular artist, like a monthly artist, you know that book ain't coming out, or it's going to look like crap every other month, or every it's only going to look good like 1 month or 2 months out of the year.
Frank, we need you to draw something. No, don't make me do stuff.
And I mean, he's wonderfully talented. I do remember my wife had seen, for people who remember when Quietly was on New X-Men with Grant Morrison, there's a cover of Emma Frost. It's just Emma Frost standing there with like her weird X-shaped bra. It's very, very strange looking. And my wife saw that and she goes, "That's the ugliest picture I've ever seen." And he does have a pouchy style, like a poochy face style. But I mean, I don't know. I guess it's not for everybody. But I'll never forget my wife being like, "That is the ugliest thing I've ever seen." I like Whiteley's work. I think he's pretty good. But he does take forever, which is why his regular stint as the New X-Men writer was kind of not, and why like a fellow by the name of Igor Kordy, he had to they would tap him like 3 days before the book went to print. It's like, "Hey, can you do 22 pages this weekend?" And he did several times, and it did not look great. And it's not his fault because he had 3 days to do 22 pages.
Let me ask you a question. What do you think of
Sure.
Scott Keith?
Scott Keith, the wrestling guy?
No, that's Keith Lee.
No. I mean the wrestling the guy who wrote columns, Scott Keith.
No, he was an artist on Lobo.
Sam Keith.
Sam Keith. Damn it!
Oh yeah,
Somewhere out there, Jesse is wanting to kick a picture of me.
Sam Keith. Yeah,
Sam Keith.
I like Sam Keith.
Do you
I
really?
like him. Yeah, I think he's all right. I liked him. I think he did a lot of stuff on the Hulk. I enjoyed.
Okay. I make fun of him incessantly on this show because I hated his work on Lobo.
I don't remember his work on Lobo. All I remember about Lobo is the covers where it looked like he was made out of like assorted pieces of meat stuck together. like you remember like in New York City when you'd have like those stands with the meat where they'd like cut the little pieces off for you as you walk by? Mm-hmm. It looked like that.
I'm looking at a Google image search of his artwork. Ugh. If you enjoy him, I will not take that from you. I'm not here to take away things you love, but I hate his artwork. I hate it with a passion. It's terrible. All right, moving on. So issue number 5. What did you think of the punchy parts?
It was okay. It was needed. We needed to see it here. It led to another interesting use of the teleportation wand, where I mean, you have the kid. The kid is like Lord, right? That's the whole thing. He's Lord because they caught an image of this kid flying in Australia from the reflection in one drop of rain, right? Like they scanned all the imagery of Australia and they found the reflection of one kid flying in a single drop of rain. So they knew they had to go to Australia. And this girl says that she knows that he's a superhero. They were on the school bus. He's getting picked on, pretending to be weak. Girl comes over and she's like, "Hey, bad shit's going on in the bridge. Bridge is going to fall apart. We need you to go handle it." He's like, "How do you know?" He's like, "Well, you always leave when something bad happens, and when you come back, it's fixed. So I know."
Well, Parker.
And so he's gone. He goes. He heads to the bridge, and that's where he meets, Snidely Whiplash or Dick Dastardly or whoever the hell he is. And he gets zapped with like a power nullifier or some shit, right? Like something that like KOs him for a few minutes, like takes away his motor functions for a little bit. And an army of dudes come. And it's like literally like hundreds of dudes. So no matter what happens, where the mother comes, the father comes, it's like there are still hundreds of armed dudes here. So Hutch makes a train that's running on tracks right now disappear and appear under this bridge, running every one of these fuckers over. I thought that was a really cool use of the power. I don't know how I hesitate to use the word realistic, but I don't know how it would work, but I liked it because it's an idea that I wouldn't have thought of. So I like that a lot. It stands to reason that this is what would cause the Hutch family to reveal themselves. It's kind of the worst case scenario for them, and it's just like, well, hell, what do? You're going to let the kid get taken? You can't do that. So it's the only like logical way to out them as super folk, or her as a super person, and him with a really cool rod. But I thought it was good. I thought it was good, but then I realized how few pages were left, and it was just like I couldn't imagine reading this in real time. Because it's like we have this ending where, I mean, it's the ending we knew we were going to get because there were only X amount of pages. It's basically Chloe looking all badass, being like, "Oh, 5-1, I like those odds," like that kind of shit. But I mean, I couldn't imagine following this in real time. Because
I wanted to ask you about that.
On.
Like, if you are somebody who goes into the comic store weekly, monthly, or whatever, you have your pull list or whatever, you buy the floppies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't call them floppies.
What do you call them?
Single issues. Don't say floppy around me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not mean to curse you, brother. So you buy the single issues, and if you pick up, like, let's say you're wandering to the comic book store and you're kind of like me, you're like, if I see another fucking superhero comic, I'm going to throw up. I got to find something new. And you see the Jupiter's Legacy there. You're like, oh, Jupiter's Legacy #1. Cool. I'll check this out. Anticipating it's going to be like
30 days, maybe?
Yeah, a month, maybe 2 months, and you're like, Jesus Christ. 2 months, May, June, 2 months, July, August, 2 months. September, October, November, December, 5 months. A year later. Would you have finished the series?
I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have the intention to, because I've been in this position before, where it's like, I mean, I'm still waiting for Kevin Smith's Daredevil the Client to come, Daredevil the Target #2 to come out, and the first issue of that came out in 2002. So, I mean, I still have that like on a pull list somewhere if it ever were to show up. I'm sure I would. I know it didn't, but I mean, it's like I probably would have fallen off. I've been in that spot before where I've had to actually go back and grab things. If it's not something that I'm talking about for a show, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And there have been some DC books that got very, very delayed not too long ago. And I would find out that like a year later, it's like, oh, well, 2 more issues came out. It's like, well, what the hell? What? Okay. So then I have to like try to track them down. So with something like this, I mean, Mark Millar has the luxury of being like Bleeding Cool's patron saint, I think. So every time he breaks wind, there's like 5 news articles on it. So I'm sure I would know that this book is coming out. But if it wasn't Mark Millar, then, I mean, who would know?
I'll tell you this much. I got pitched on two series that were happening contemporaneously when they were pitched to me. And I told both people, keep an eye on them. And then I tried to schedule them based on what looked like the schedule was going to be. So if this is a 5-issue thing and 3 issues are out now, based on how they're coming out, I can schedule it here.
Doomsday
clock. I was wrong both times.
Is it Doomsday Clock?
That would be number 3, but no. One of them was Transformers Back to the Future, and you can take 3 guesses as to who pitched me on that one. The first 2 don't count. And then the other one was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin, who, when it was pitched to me, I think only 2 issues had come out. and by now a third one has come out. Your guess is as good as mine when 4 and 5 come out.
Yeah.
I can't figure out the publishing calendar based on what they've already done here. It seems to be, whenever the fuck they get around to it.
Yeah, basically.
And I know that the only reason why I'm even tracking these things is because of the people who want to do them.
Sure.
Otherwise, I'm like, no. If you guys can't get a fucking organized schedule going and get these things out in a timely fashion, go fuck yourself. I'll wait a year and pick up a trade later on.
There you go.
And that's kind of my final word on this Jupiter's Legacy thing, because it was a fine enough story, but I can't imagine it sold all that well. The way that they published this thing, 2, 3, 5, 6, 12 months later. But I would imagine now that the show's on Netflix and people are like, oh, this is based on a comic, and and then running to the comic book store to pick up the trade. See, now I can see it selling well, but I can't see the way they did this selling the individual issues having any kind of traction.
Sure. Let's see here, I'm looking at Comic-Con here, and the first issue sold really well.
Sure.
Yeah, the first issue sold really well, actually. It was the third highest selling book of the month, 105,000 copies.
Mm-hmm. And then issue number 5?
Let's see here. July 2016. No, that's a volume. Number 2. They only have them for 1 and 2. Really? You shitting me?
We stopped counting after issue number 2. Nobody cares.
They just stopped. Yeah, no, I was a huge booster of a company, Oni Press, back around the turn of the century.
Oh yeah, we just did something from Oni Press not that long ago.
I was anything Oni I bought. I was really, really big into their stuff, and this was kind of how that went too. It's like I remember there was I don't remember what it was called, but it was a very noir type of book. It was totally outside my wheelhouse, but I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed kind of spreading my wings a little bit. And I picked up the first 2 issues, and then it was literally like 9 months later where the third issue came out. And the internet wasn't as big a thing as it is now back in like 1999, and I was still on dial-up back then, so I wasn't hopping online very often. But it was just like, how do you even follow some of this stuff here? And luckily for Mark Millar, he's got cachet. He also has Frank Whiteley, who also has cachet. Nobody else would be able to get away with this. Nobody at all would be able to get away with this. I don't know if you'd be able to read these things that spaced out and get what you need from the story, but that reminds me of a quote from, I believe it was Mark Waid. And this is something that Reggie and I would talk about a lot, because this is a quote that is accurate, but it's wrong-headed, and we hated it for it. Watchmen took years and years to come out. Watchmen, the story everyone points to as like the peak of comic book storytelling. Whether you agree or not, people will point to that book a lot. Mm-hmm. It took years to come out. It's 12 issues. It took several years. There was like a year and a half break between 11 and 12. And so Mark Waid said, who cares? Nobody's going to remember that in 20 years. People are going to remember the story. They're not going to remember how long it took for it to come out, which isn't wrong, but it's disrespectful to the people following it during the time. Right now, people are discovering Jupiter's Legacy via Hulu or Netflix or whatever it is, and they'll have this story that they can go to, and it's done. It's right there for them. One package. And Mark Waid is right, because it doesn't matter that it took 3 years to get 5 issues out. And that is kind of the problem with current day comics, and the fact that current day comics...
It doesn't really encourage you to go to the comic book store picking up monthlies.
It sure doesn't. And, compound that with this... Mark Millar, like I mentioned, a lot of his stories feel like they were written... They were brainstormed in a boardroom. We covered the Image launch over on the Cosmic Treadmill years ago. We talked about Youngblood. Say what you will about Youngblood. We talked about Youngblood. We talked about Savage Dragon. We talked about Wildcats. We talked about Spawn. 3 of those stories felt like they had heart. 1 of them did not. All talented people on their own ways here. The one that I had a problem with was Wildcats by Jim Lee. Jim Lee's a fantastic artist. He's got skill that very, very few have. Wildcats felt to me like it had zero heart. It was a story, it was a team that he knew would sell. You had the big strong guy. You had the Cyclops type guy in personality. You had the one with the claws. You had the magic girl. Yeah, I mean, you had the tropes of comic book characters here. Nothing in reading Wildcats told me that Jim Lee was scribbling these things on his notebook in high school. Youngblood is a piece of shit, but Rob Liefeld loved it. He was drawing those characters on his Trapper Keeper in 8th grade. You knew that there was heart behind it. Eric Larson probably still has the Trapper Keepers that he drew Savage Dragon on as a kid. These things had heart. Todd McFarlane, I mean, say what you will about him, he wanted to do Spawn for a long time. Jim Lee's like, ooh, what's big right now? Well, I just left X-Men and sold 8 million copies. How about I do something like that? Mark Miller here is trying to sell something to Netflix. He's not trying to tell a comic book story. He's like, what can I do now? Oh, we can tear down superheroes. That's kind of big, right? We can do that. I can do my own version of the Justice League where I can have them do violent things and curse a lot. I could do that. It won't be as brash as the boys. It won't be as cynical as the boys, but I could do something like that. That's what's big right now. And lo and behold, that's what we get. We get a story that was written to be a TV show, to be popular because it's using all of the tropes that are big right now. Didn't make it a bad story. I quite enjoyed it. But it doesn't have heart. There's no heart here. This is a story that he knew would sell to something bigger than comics. And it's exactly what he did. And more power to him for it, I guess.
We're reviewing the show on Thursday. I'll have to let you know how good it is or bad it is.
Okay.
All right. I think we covered it, right? You good?
I think so.
All right.
It was a good book. It was a good book.
Yeah. I enjoyed reading it. It just felt incomplete,
Yeah.
I think there was more grist for the mill here to be had.
For sure.
You will be back next week. We'll be doing an afternoon recording. We are going to be speaking of famous authors. We will be doing Man of Steel by Brian Michael Bendis.
BMB.
That was one. Doesn't really attach itself to anything. We're just kind of doing it because why not? It's been sitting on my bookshelf. I had been trying to figure out a reason to do it, and then what better reason? I think, and then it became what better reason to do it than just to talk about it because it's a good book to read, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow on Damn You Hollywood, we'll be reviewing Spiral, which is an offshoot of the Saw franchise. Wednesday, on the Metal Hammer of Doom, we are doing our second EP. First time we ever did one was for Viva Presidente Trump. But we're doing Saliva every 20 years, and then, that's only 6 songs, and they're all re-recordings of older songs. So we're going to play a whole bunch of Saliva singles. We're going to have ourselves a good time. Thursday is the aforementioned Jupiter's Legacy. Chris will be on, hopefully, to talk WrestleMania Backlash early in the day. And even before that, myself and Chris Bailey are going to do a quick review of Impact Under Siege, featuring Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers versus Finn Juice and Eddie Edwards. And then on Friday is a shitload of stuff. Our Flashback Friday episode will be Damn You Hollywood, Batman v Superman, re-air from when that came out. MODOK on Hulu, the animated show, will be debuting on Hulu. So to coincide with that, we will be reviewing MODOK Assassin from the Secret Wars from 2016.
2015.
Myself and Robert Winfrey will be reviewing Army of the Dead from Zack Snyder, starring Dave Bautista. And then in the late evening, myself and Jason Teasley will be doing a Long Road to Ruin. Aquarium of the Dead will have just released that day. So you could either watch Army of the Dead or Aquarium of the Dead, whichever zombie movie you like.
Nice. Land, sea, and air.
That's right. Aquarium of the Dead marks the third part of the Zombies trilogy. So there's Zombies 1, Zombies 2, and then Aquarium of the Dead. We are going to review all 3 movies on a very special B-side movie edition of Long Road to Ruin. And then on Saturday, we go into the archive for yet another Long Road to Ruin. This time, Pat Mullen was the guest star, and because it was totally 80s Pat, we talked about a totally 80s franchise, Missing in Action, starring Chuck Norris. And then finally on Sunday, we have a TV party re-air for Luke Cage Season 1, so now both seasons will be on this feed. We were supposed to do Shadow and Bone yesterday, but as you can probably tell from parts of this podcast, I'm struggling with with my voice. I'm having some issues with my tongue and jaw, so I was not up to it last night. But hopefully by this Sunday, this will have healed. I'll have been on some proper medicine, or I'm going to start shooting heroin. One of the two. Either way, I should feel better. And we will discuss Season 1 of Shadow and Bone. That's me and Sean Comer, and then the aforementioned Man of Steel a week from tonight. We'll actually be doing two different comics. Myself and Chris Sheehan will be talking Man of Steel, and then the evening time, marking the end and the review of which for Invincible on Amazon Prime, we will be looking at the second volume of trades for Invincible. 8 is enough. That's all. Last week, real quick, we re-aired our Jessica Jones Season 1 review. We reviewed Truth, Red, White, and Black. We did a deep dive on WrestleMania 2. Evan Bevins and I, speaking of why not just review a book we like, reviewed Deadpool the Duck. We reviewed Wrath of Man. It was the Superblog team-up. Our entries were Dr. Doolittle and Dr. Feelgood. We reviewed Weezer Van Weezer. And finally, we did 3 hours on Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Chris Sheehan, if you've ever wanted to hear 5 nerds arguing over chain of custody over Captain America's shield, this is the podcast for you.
Ooh, nothing could delight me more.
By the end of that podcast, you and anyone who listens to it will want to walk into the woods to live deliberately. Mm-hmm. We re-aired our Long Road to Ruin for Saw Parts 1 and 2. We reviewed Woman in the Window. We also reviewed Stowaway with Jeff Sloboda, who has joined our network of guest hosts. He made his debut, and we talked about the lovely Anna Kendrick. And then on Saturday, Alexis and Jesse released Tripped Up Trivia. We also did a syndicated source material for What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man. All right, those are all my plugs. Chris, take me home, baby doll.
Okie dokie. Still doing X-Lapsed. As of this recording, I think episode 187 is coming out. So almost at 200, which, if what people are telling me is true, is about the halfway point of this era. So there might be 400 episodes of this show. So there's that. In the off days where I'm not doing X-Lapsed, I'm probably going to be doing Essential X-Lapsed, going back to the Silver Age to take a look at some old X-Men books here. I'm also compiling older episodes of X-Lapsed into collected editions in basically filling out the trade. They've been putting out anthologies of the Dawn of X books and Reign of X books, so I'm compiling episodes into those nice sizable chunks and dropping 4 to 8 hours of audio on people every Saturday, which hopefully they haven't already heard, or if they have, they want to listen to it again, because who wouldn't, right? What else? What else do I've got going on here? Me and Chris Bailey are finally getting together to do Quester Days, where we're going to be taking a look at Marvel's epic ElfQuest series from 1985, ran 32 issues. And we have one episode out, the pilot from a year ago, but we're actually going to get moving on getting more. So those will be coming hopefully at least twice a month, starting in the next couple of weeks or so. What else? You could find me on Twitter at Ace Comics, and the sites are chrisandreggie.podbean.com, and the blog is chrisisoninfiniteearths.com.
We got to make some time to do at least 2 different X books. We talked about Deadly Genesis, which comes after House of M at some point, but more importantly was written by Ed Brubaker, and that was why I wanted to do it, and you seemed interested.
Absolutely.
But also, since you're a big X-Men fan, we should do God Loves Man Kills one of these days.
That's a good idea. That was on me and Reggie's list for a long, long time, and we never got to it.
It's on my short list of books I want to do. If for no other reason than it was my dad and I's favorite book when I was a kid. If for no other reason than we used to just like to say the title out loud, God Loves, Man Kills. Have I mentioned my dad's an atheist? And with that, I want to thank Sheehan for being on the show, and I want to thank you all for listening and tolerating my slightly slurred speech. I'm promising you I'm hopefully going to get this fixed soon. In the meantime, in between time, thanks for joining us here on Source Material Live. Be well, be safe, and behave.